Well, joining me to debate the cost of the climate crisis, Policy Director of the Grantham Institute on Climate Change, Bob Ward, and TalkTV presenter Richard Tice. In the studio, down the line, Professor Judith Curry, climatologist and author of the book Climate, Uncertainty and Risk, Rethinking Our Response. Thank you, all three of you. Richard, I'll come straight to you. I know this is a topic close to your heart, and you've been down there at some of the protests today around ULEZ, and you and I do not agree on this topic.
Yeah, sure. Look, the question is, does London have a toxic air problem? And the simple answer is no. The quality of London's air is the best it's ever been.
According to who?
According to everybody who looks at this, according to the World Health Organization, we've got our city of London is in the best 25% of cities around the world. The data clearly shows at the roadside, across most of London, we are within World Health Organization guidelines. The only area where it's toxic, Rosanna, that everybody seems to forget, yourself included, is the tube, where it is brutally unhealthy.
Of course it's unhealthy on the tube. It's a Victorian infrastructure.
But if
we all appreciate that.
If you look at the World Health Organization data, I've used the monitors, the meters. You walk around London's roads, and particularly in outer London, and we are below the WHO guidelines. We don't have an air pollution problem in London.
With all due respect, I will come to you, Bob, because I can see you're shaking your head. With all due respect, Richard, you're a politician and a businessman, but not a scientist. So we will come to the science experts shortly on this. But
I'm just reading the data.
On the politics side, I'm interested to know why you're pegging your political movement so much to this, when there has been so much polling that shows a lot of Brits actually really do care about climate change, and they want to see the Conservatives do more.
Don't confuse London's air quality with climate change. It's a completely different point. You're talking about what is the quality of London's air. It's the best it's ever been. I'll tell you why, because this is what people care about in London. And this is a tax grab on the poorest, the least well-off small businesses in London. And that's the point. And you don't seem to care about that.
Of course I do. Of course I do, Richard. The cash grab point I want to come to, Bob, on shortly, but it is about climate change because emissions necessarily fit into it.
It's about the air quality in London. It's the data, Rosanna, and the data shows we're within the World Health Organization guidelines. It's the best it's ever been.
Go ahead, Bob. Come and join us.
So what Richard's saying is completely untrue. The air is monitored by a group at Imperial College London. The last set of data was for 2020. So remember, it was a year when we had the lockdown in London. There was not a single site across London where the levels of particulate matter and of nitrogen dioxide, the two main air pollutants, were below the limit set by the World Health Organization, which is 20 micrograms for nitrogen dioxide. So it's completely untrue to say that the air in London is fit to breathe. It is dangerously high.
Has it ever been better than it is now, Bob? Has it ever been better? The answer is no. It's the best it's ever been.
Richard,
there is not toxic air. You're lying.
You're shut me down. You claim that the air was within WHO limits.
And it is.
That is completely untrue.
It is. I've been round with the meters. It says it's healthy.
Richard, you and a meter is not a scientist.
It's a World Health Organization approved meter, Rosanna. What more? Have you done it? Do you know what you're talking about?
No, because I'm not a scientist. I wouldn't know how to read a meter.
You don't have to be a scientist to walk around the road with a meter,
Richard, you have to have the meters stay in the same place, and you've got to measure them over a year. You can't just wander around during the afternoon and think, I'm doing science. This is the answer. It just doesn't work that way, Richard.
So how does it work? How does it work when you do it day after day and it says it's healthy, Bob?
London Air Quality Network, they are the experts. They publish the data. Go and have a look for yourself.
And has it ever been better? Has it ever been better?
Clear, Gentlemen, Richard, that it's above the WHO limits.
We have somebody else in this discussion, Judith. She's listening in to all of this. Judith, you take a slightly different view, I know, from Bob in terms of the climate emergency, but do you think ULEZ is warranted?
Well, this is just classic, seeing this disagreement. Both statements from both sides have elements of truth, but both are wrong in not recognizing the other side. So what you have when the facts are disputed and the interpretations of the evidence disagree, well, you try to find common ground. You focus on, what are some sensible policies without having to rely on agreeing on uncertain facts. And, the climate change issue is this in spades. The ULEZ is a microcosm of this disagreement. But with regards to climate change, we have to recognize that we have the climate crisis isn't what it used to be even a few years ago. The worst emissions scenarios are now off the table. The UN Conference of the Parties are now working off of a 2.5 degrees centigrade warming by the end of the 21st century, and we've already warmed by 1.2 degrees. The IPCC admits that the climate models are running too hot. Recent estimates of the climate sensitivity to carbon dioxide are increasingly lower. But the biggest problem is we've confounded the slow creep of warming with extreme weather events. The extreme weather events that we're seeing have little to no relationship with the slow creep of global warming. So we need
Judith.
to... Okay.
Thank you. I love the topic of climate change. It's so interesting, but it is also so confounding because you've got four people, in fact, in this conversation coming at it from all sorts of different angles and people saying this data, no, that's wrong, this data, that's wrong. Bob is shaking his head now to what you were saying with regards to warming. And I know that in terms of the way that climate scientists stand on this issue, you are somewhat of an outlier in this, aren't you?
Not really. What I have to say is, well, within the framework of the IPCC assessment report, it is not within the framework of all of the alarming rhetoric coming from the UN, journalists and alarmist politicians and environmental advocacy groups. I mean, we have a deeply complex, highly uncertain issue that we're trying to deal with. And the oversimplistic story that we're being fed by UN officials and by activists and advocates is just misleading us into a bad direction for urgently implementing policies.
Why?
That could be
why?
What's
What's the scheme, the strategy to do that?
Okay, this goes back decades into, there's a worldview from the UN Environmental Program back in the 1980s and 1990s. About degrowth, anti-capitalism, and so on. So there's a worldview that likes this. And very early on in all this, in 1992, we had a treaty, an international treaty to prevent dangerous human-caused climate change by eliminating fossil fuels before we had any evidence of unusual warming. So the policy cart has been way out in front of the scientific horse from the very beginning on it. We need to step back and rethink all this.
Thank you, Judith. Bob, go on, your thoughts.
Well, Judith has told an amusing revisionist history of the science of climate change. The fact that we are on a lower temperature path is down to the fact that many countries are now cutting their emissions. And so we are seeing that the movement is towards lower emissions in many countries, including the UK. UK has reduced its emissions greatly since 1990. We need the emerging market and developing countries like China to reduce their emissions now. So that's good thing. But we're nowhere near on a safe path. And Judy is incredibly talking from the United States at the moment. There's a big hurricane out in the Gulf of Mexico, which they're expecting to develop and intensify rapidly before it hits land in Florida. Linked to the fact that the sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico now are very high, and they're very high because the Earth is warming. And Judy is saying, oh, well, it's got nothing to do with extreme weather. It's completely wrong.
Sorry.
Go on, Judith.
I am a real, genuine expert on the issue of hurricanes. I forecast them in my company. I'm an expert on the climate dynamics of hurricanes. There is nothing unusual going on with the hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico right now.
I'm afraid that Judy disagrees with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
She's an expert.
No,
Rosanna was once a scientific expert. There you have one.
She disagrees with the American scientific establishment. She's out on her own on this.
She's not on her own. There are hundreds and hundreds who agree with
It's absolutely not true.
Agree with the statements made by the NOAA GFDL statement on hurricanes and climate change. Okay, it's completely.
You're saying that there's no link between rapid intensification and climate change?
No, there is not.
Well, I'm afraid you're out on your own again, Judy.
But Rosanna, this is really important. This is the point. Scientists disagree with each other.
Yeah, which allows a vacuum for people to
No, it
manipulate
allows
data.
debate and discussion and challenge.
Which is
You
what
seem
we're
to think
doing.
that
That's what we're
scientists
doing.
always have to have a
World
consensus.
Meteorological Organization
Go on, do this.
and the IPCC did not find any evidence of an increase in intensity in the observational record or an increase in rapid intensification.
Judy, have you published your paper explaining that there is no link between the rapid intensification of hurricanes and climate change?
I am citing right now, I do fundamental research on this. I am citing the IPCC and the World Meteorological Organization assessments. You are off base.
No, I'm
here.
not. I'm not. I'm citing exactly what the literature says, Judy. And as you know, you've not published anything that has shown that there is no link between intensification and climate change.
This has been a brilliant example of why this debate is not going away, why it's such a heated issue, even over these ULEZ cameras here in London, because, you know, as Richard, yes, you point out, there is not consensus on this issue. That's why we're having this debate. That's why I'm open to hearing all sides.
But that's why we must always have these debates, and we must not be smeared and labelled.
But you have to tell the truth, Richard. You have to
you absolutely do.
You haven't told the truth.
And you haven't told me the truth.
You haven't told the truth.
You haven't admitted that London's air quality is the best it's ever been. Answer me a simple question.
It's still dangerous and it's still above WHO.
Answer me a simple question. If you pay £12.50, right, to drive your car in the new ULEZ extended zone, right, how is that going to help change the
Don't you
pollution?
agree
It's
the
not going to change it at all.
The polluter pays. That's the principle.
So you don't care about the poor. You're so selfish. You're so rich. You don't care about the poor.
Richard.
The least will off small businesses.
Richard.
You're richer than me. Come on.
Give me a break.
I work at a university.
You don't care about the poorest in London. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Richard.
Disgrace.
Richard.
You don't care about the poor.
You can't tell the truth and you lose the argument.
Poor people can't afford a 20 or 30 grand car. There's £2,000 scrappage scheme of £2 which makes no difference whatsoever.
Scrappage scheme should be more generous and it should be the government coming in and helping.
There's no such thing as government money. It's all our money. It's taxpayers' money. London's air quality, particularly in the outer zone, is the best it's ever been.
I think wealthy people shouting that, you know, other people don't care about the poor. When we think about fossil fuels as well.
He doesn't care about the £12.50. Those who can't afford it, Rosanna. That's what he's just admitted.
Look, we have to wrap it up there. We have a lot more coming on the show. Gentlemen and Judith down the line with us as well. This has been fascinating. Knew it was going to be spicy. Thanks so much. Not sure we found consensus. Not sure if we ever will. But we have had a discussion, haven't we?